Frost just want a turn to deal with it. Priests obviously have multiple ways of stealing it or mitigating it, lowering its attack value for multiple turns. I am curious to see if it can work out for Ryvius in this series, because it is a cool tech, even if I don't necessarily think it's quite on the money in this metagame.
That's right. And from the other players who are bringing target Bomb Warrior lineups, whether it's hard or soft, I think they are also hoping to maybe get a side benefit of being pretty good against Soul Demon Hunter as well, because that is a deck that has finite amounts of damage. It is a lot of damage, but if you heal up enough and hit the weapon removal at the right time, it can lend itself to a similar strategy as going up against Bomb Warrior. So I feel that that's probably the deck that Ryvius' lineup will have the best shot against, but for now, he's lining up Priest up against Flurry's Secret Rogue.
Indeed, the Rogue was banned from Ryvius' side, so he's going to be having to take down a Rogue without one of his own for this series. And already, I'm going to go ahead and say this is the kind of hand that can get something done as Rogue. It's got the nice combination of value and also some real punch to it with the Questing Adventurer when that comes down.
Yeah, and the next turn is looking like great timing for it, because Questing coined 1 Thief, puts Questing at a nice 4/4 stat line, which is probably the best to get in the early game up against Priest, and he still maintains Backstab Miscreant for an activation next turn.
And it's perfectly positioned in both space and time, because it's the right size to not be hit by Shadow of Death, and it's in the right time to not be hit with Wave of Apathy plus Cabal Acolyte quite yet. So this Questing Adventurer almost guaranteed to be able to attack in for at least 1 turn.
And for Ryvius, because he is most likely committing to playing Shadow or Death the next turn to clean up the Questing Adventure, I wouldn't hate the idea of taking a second one, keep in the back pocket, but looks like he's going for mana flexibility, taking that Renew, also because he knows he's going to be hit with a fair amount of damage this turn.
Indeed. And now Flurry needs to really consider this, because on one hand you could say, well, the Questing is very likely to die here to either Shadow or Death or maybe even be stolen with Wave of Apathy, so I should hold back. But on the other hand, even though you're using a lot of resources here by going all in on the Questing, you're getting a lot of damage, which is worth a lot in its own right.
And I like that he's cashing in on this damage using Prep Ambush, even though the ambush is probably not immediately giving him too much value. The fact that he plays 2 more cards is 2 more damage on the Questing, and sometimes Ryvius doesn't have the Shadow or Death.
And the ambush, it's like everything here I think is really well positioned from Flurry, because again, the worst thing that can happen here, as I keep talking about, is Cabal Acolyte on Wave of Apathy. He's gone super wide on the board. He even has ambush, so if there was some impossible way to clear up all these minions, as soon as the Cabal Acolyte is played, it has a 50% chance to just steal the 2/3 poisonous. It's a very, very nice setup.
He even forewent the backstab for that purpose. I suppose, like, if the Cabal Acolyte steals the poisonous minion, he wants to keep away in his back pocket to deal with the poisonous minion without having to expend minion trade.
Ooh. That was a very quick Waxamancy instead of... what's it even called? 1 mana, go back to hand. Daring Escape
was definitely on my mind for this turn. But Faceless Rager is nothing to scoff at, even with just 4 HP on it. That's a decent-sized minion threatening.
Yeah, I mean, this is...
Secret Passage picked up is a big deal, too.
This is premium on this turn. 5 attack to be thrown down on the board is not something that would be easy to achieve. And he's got himself in pretty good position now, pushing a lot of damage every turn. And this is what you want to be doing as Rogue. When you're running Eviscerates in your list, get your opponent down to that point where they're afraid of dying every single turn.
Now, Ryvius, I believe, knows that this is an ambush, because he did not trigger anything else with his spell last turn. So it feels bad to just slam a card to it onto it, and it also feels bad to just play Spellkin, but I think what he needs to think about is how he can set up for the best Soul Mirror on the following turn.
Yeah, I mean, outside of that, you're looking at, like, Sticky Finger and Swing, just to, like, mainly have a body on board, that actually affects something immediately.
I like that he took the Radiance off of his Renew, realizing that it's going to be a couple more turns of a beatdown, but he probably won't have time to play it till the post-Soul Mirror turn.
Ooh. weirdly enough here for Flurry, I'm not even sure if you trade in the poisonous. Like, it is a lot of damage, yeah. And also, he kind of needs the board space with Evil Miscreant found.
I mean, I'm looking at this Apexis Blast, Kobold Lackey, and Eviscerate plus Secret Passage. Like, I'm thinking,
Fair
what
play.
if you just send nearly everything face? Of course, Apotheosis is still a threat, so a couple of these things could be spent on trades. But I'm highly interested in just shipping an Eviscerate face this turn if possible, or onto the minions.
I mean, this is super clean now. You can evolve your Evil Miscreant here. Hopefully get a minion that survives against Soul Mirror. Didn't get that, but still a big threat on board. And hope to, like you were saying, just push for lethal next turn.
Well, if you are expecting Soul Mirror, and that you would be left with 3 damage on board. So if you went for Eviscerate there, then Apexis Kobold would have been lethal the next turn.
14, so he would have been down to 7 this turn. And yeah, you're correct. That would actually have just been the perfect play.
Now he doesn't quite have the mana to get everything done.
That's a good spot.
Still in a good spot though.
And so now, how does he go about this? Because, you know, first thing on his mind, I'm sure, even though he didn't go about it perfectly, is the damage plan. But do you complement that with trying to find more damage from your deck with Secret Passage, or by trying to lock down board first?
I like the idea of going for Secret Passage, not necessarily for the damage. I like clearing everything out of the way for Apotheosis, but the difference between this turn and the next one is that all 3 of Kobold Lackey, Apotheosis, and Kobold Lackey, Apexis Blast, and Eviscerate were all playable that turn, so not sure if he necessarily needed to go for the Kobold this turn. But if he didn't give himself a guaranteed way of dealing with all of the minions.
Yeah, and given that Backstab was never going to be useful on any of the opposing minions, I can understand why he went for this line.
Ryvius has a little bit of breathing room, but the backstab on the questing is huge because now he can't just Holy Smite it away. Penance, for that matter. Okay.
And it's
Going
finally
for the
happening.
Full steal instead. Yep.
Yeah, this is what we've been setting up for a long while. Flurry did an excellent job in the early game of playing around this, but Ryvius found the opportunity for the Cabal Acolyte, and now for Flurry, things are starting to get a little bit scary. Not because he's dying anytime soon, but because Plan A is looking like it might have to be used to clear the board. This damage probably isn't going face.
And the questing on Ryvius' side will just keep growing as well, so
Yeah.
you might see Flurry expend the Eviscerate on that. Pretty painful. Freezing Trap is an interesting proposition because now he can isolate one minion on board, and then Apotheosis doesn't become a punish in that case.
Alternatively,
I really like the freezing.
yeah, I do like the freezing as well. The counterspell can like kind of proactively get by it, but I guess with a couple of one-cost spells that you know are in hand, it's a bit more finicky.
Plagiarize, and then he can Eviscerate probably at this point the 2/4, even though you're telegraphing Freezing Trap. You don't want that to be bounced back to Ryvius' hand.
Yeah, that seems like a slightly better play.
Oh! There's the Apo.
So Ryvius has some pretty strong information here, though, right?
I would say. Unless that's an amazing mind game from Flurry, I think most of the time you'd be eviscerating questing unless it's exactly Freezing Trap. He doesn't commit the Apo first, decides to still proc the secret because he, you know, at some point needs to do that. Could be seeing Cartut instead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at if you ever just commit the questing again. Like, you can get it up to 5/5 on this turn, which is something.
Kobold instead looking for a way to deal with Hanar somehow. It's definitely very valid.
Yeah, and I guess the main fear is, as against all the time when you don't know the rogue secrets that you're facing against, you don't want to go in. It could just be a plagiarize. If you make a huge questing, you've just given them an even bigger questing they can throw right back at you.
You're gonna go off again with the secret train. Another ambush seems pretty premium.
Indeed. So one of the things that we always talk about is not being baited into going for Hannard too heavily here. Do you think this is where he should stop and develop something else like the Cobalt Spellkin, for example?
Possibly. I mean,
Wow.
I like the Hanar this turn just to the point where you come up with something that punishes an isolated minion, because he could still trade Dagger down the ooze. And Pressure Plate does somewhat punish an isolated minion, because if that's going to be the Apotheosis target, well, it straight up dies. So I'm surprised that Flurry went for the Secret Passage when he did here, but he ends up with a Blackjack Stunner, so that's still going to be a full clear.
Yeah, I think it was most likely going for like a 33% Edwin, right? With 12 cards in his deck, draws 4 of them, which would have been huge. You know, that's where you really, really want to be. He could have get Blackjack Stunner as well in the ideal instance. Didn't end up with the Edwin though, and so it means Secret Passage is used, which is fine. He's still got a lot of value in hand, but the damage is not there quite yet. Again, it's an instance of him having the early board control, having the chip damage, but not being able to capitalize on it now.
It's a tenuous board state, but I think it's fine for Flurry to go about this, because against Priest in particular, their capability for swinging the whole board doesn't usually result in you being threatened with counter-lethal immediately after. So as long as Flurry can get the chip in for a couple turns and maintain Ryvius not having an active Apotheosis target, then he's in a good spot.
Right into my trap.
That's an abysmal turn from Ryvius. But there are no natural saps in Flurry's list, so he's reasonably certain that the Kartut will get the full healing through.
Yeah, does it ever make you wonder if Flurry was supposed to step the Blackjack Stunner and not play it last turn? Obviously, that means an Ooze is still sitting about in play on the board. But he knows that there are 2 Kartut defenders in the deck, which would be absolutely premium to play.
That's true. Definitely close.
Tough spot.
Redemption into Edwin.
Yeah, none of these are playable on this turn, but I guess you just go with whatever 1-drop. It doesn't especially matter here, I don't think. Nice
Panic
PT.
is very clean here, so he can get more trades off of the poisonous minion.
And now he's starting to set up those defenses. We've got a wide board in the case of Cabal Acolyte plus Wave of Apathy again. Counterspell in play in case a Shadower Death wants to come down. It's going to be very, very tough for Ryvius to answer this, even if he had the cards to do so.
All the secrets in the world, but Flurry doesn't even need to care about respecting Apotheosis because he has 5 layers of contingency against it.
Let the user attack. Right, there we go.
That's the way out. I have to discover Shadower Death here or Soul Mirror?
Whispers of Evil can give him an out, but maybe you just take Holy Nova. Does that keep him alive?
Don't think it does. I mean, based on Flurry's hand, but from Ryvius' perspective, it might.
Must move quickly.
A simple spell should do.
Wave of Apathy.
A whole lot of generation this turn, but the Master Spell is too late.
Yep, we were looking for Silence, Wave of Apathy, anyway to extend the game even just that little bit longer. And while he may not be dead on board with 15, 20, bish bash bosh, easy peasy lethal for Flurry. And again, like we were saying at the start of the day, it was a roundabout way to get there. Not the most perfect game from Flurry, as you spotted that nice lethal setup in the mid game. But I think the thinking overall was there. He understood that you want to have just enough threats on board at all times to be constantly threatening with Priest.
It's true. I think that that was some lightning pace play right from the beginning of taking Waxamancy, and then there were a whole bunch of other Discover options on both sides where I would have taken much more time than either of those players. I think they still had the right general idea, but maybe from Flurry, I think there was really that great window to close out the game a little bit sooner. And from Ryvius, not to say that the Priest deck has a terrible matchup, but I really think that this particular build, which is more built to deal with Bomb Warrior, is starting to show some weaknesses.
Yeah, indeed. And I think while we have criticized some players in APAC for taking too long with some of their turns, letting the rope burn out and not getting their entire turns in when the stress gets in, I would rather have a nice middle ground where you take the appropriate amount of time. But if you have to play too fast or too slow, I'd rather you get the turn done, even if you don't think through every option perfectly. So good first win there from Flurry, getting in a good spot to take the win up against Ryvius. When we come back from this break, we're going to see if he can go all the way. We'll be right back. You're watching the first series of the day here in Hearthstone Grandmasters. A pretty nice game to be seen from Flurry here. Like we want to see, what we like to see. Sorry, I can't even speak here in Asia Pacific. I think good overall matchup understanding. There definitely seems to be, for me, the thing that is slowly but surely improving as we go through the seasons. Even if we're seeing some technical mistakes along the way, I do feel like the practice groups are getting stronger and stronger, more entrenched together, and learning the matchups very, very well, as we just saw, in my opinion, from Flurry. He's going to be going now with the Rogue that has won. Sorry, now that the Rogue has won with Demon Hunter up against the Priest. And I feel like for Ryvius, this is maybe a nice side effect of his targeting against Warrior, is that his Priest has got a pretty good matchup against the Demon Hunter.
I would have to agree. Even if we are looking at the more extreme comparison of Chonsu's lineup, Chonsu, I think, hardly hit any Soul Demon Hunters as well, which is probably his secondary target after Bomb Warrior. And I still feel that Ryvius' lineup is somewhat targeting Bomb Warrior with the oozes in his Demon Hunter and his own Bomb Warrior. So I feel that Ryvius has a pretty good shot here. And right off the bat, he's keeping the ooze to get rid of a Marrow Slicer somewhere down the line.
Yeah, I can respect holding on to that. Once again, it's like I was saying yesterday, with these modern builds of control decks, you generally do just keep the tech cards. You don't particularly worry about finding a curve or things to do in the early game, because so much of the deck does a similar thing in the early game. So you keep the cards you really need for the matchup, and then trust your deck to fill in the blanks.
And beyond these Ooze tech cards, Ryvius' own tech of double Cartut Defender and 1 Grave Rune is also, by my estimation, going to be very relevant in this matchup, because Flurry's damage largely comes from his own hero attacking face, and if there's taunts in the way, there's limited ways to get through them without actually giving the death rattle. Although it's worth noting that Flurry runs 1 natural copy of Consume Magic on top of the double Wand Mace, so we could give him more.
So while we were talking about the play of Ooze being kept as a tech card, Ryvius just threw it out on 2. I wonder if the Soul Jailer there had been there, would it still have been played out? Was it just to try and catch the 1-3 with a value trade, or was it kept just because you want to have stuff to do in the early game?
I could not tell you, Derek. I think a large reason for playing it is after having seen the 1-3, but if you ask me if that had not hit the board, I feel like Ryvius would have held on to it, especially since he didn't even have, say, a follow-up Apotheosis onto the Ooze.
Yeah, I do think I agree with you there. Love the timing of the mana burn as well from Flurry. I think it's really good to go for it instead of the hero power there, just because the next 2 turns are really spoken for here. With Soul Shard into Soul Shard being the most likely play, it's super clean.
And it also has that side benefit of preventing the Cobalt Spellkin on turn 4, which he knew was available because of the Draconic studies that Ryvius played out earlier. And now Ryvius is having to work just reactively turn after turn. Flurry's curve is looking very, very powerful indeed. He can even play the Shard Shatter to unlock the skull because he has no soul fragments left. So it's not blowing up his own board.
Yeah, that's actually pretty
weird.
sick. Ryvius here, obviously with 1 Shadow of Death down, you don't expect to see the other as Flurry, and you would be correct in that assumption. No way to deal with this. No way to deal with the Soul Shard right now, and just having to delay the problem. But now for Flurry, he just top decks an even better way to deal with this board than messing around with unlocking Skull of Gul'dan. This is just insane.
Flurry's turns altogether have not taken a single minute. I think he's just playing at a lightning pace, and you know what? All of it has been on point so far. Huge top deck for Ryvius, though I was gonna say he needed a miracle to stay in this. Notably, he held on to the Radiance last turn, even though he had 1 mana remaining, because I think he was trying to build up for a big Pyro swing. Obviously, that's not enough charges to get through everything. So the Soul Mirror was necessary.
And understandably, things do take a bit of a downswing in terms of the tempo now for Flurry. Sociologist Militia as a tempo 5-5 doesn't sound all too great for me. I'm much more interested in, as you were saying a couple turns ago, setting up the skull for the following turn and probably just playing Chaos Strike as well. Because you can...
It's between the Chaos Strike and Skull and Kane, right? Because mana utilization, but also you're scared of throwing down Kane in case it dies and a Cartut hits the board and you don't have the Consume Magic in hand. Flurry is just going to go for max mana expenditure here. It also just gives him stronger board presence, but it's risky.
Yeah, the sequencing is kind of interesting. Like, he could have gone with Renew his face first to see what you get, but I guess renewing the minion here to try and get maximum stickiness on the board, even if it comes at the expense of your own health total.
And he can just finish with Inner Fire. I was curious if he wanted to heal up his Pyro, but I think because Flurry's hero power could still just deal with a 3-1, Ryvius values the 2 HP on his face a little bit more. There's the Marrow Slicer. Consume Magic also is really huge, not this turn, but we can see Ryvius has been sitting on this Cartut Defender.
I'm really bad at remembering board states, but I feel like Ryvius there could have gone with a double activation instead of a triple activation with Pyro. And if he'd used the Holy Smite instead, he could have still cleared up the Cane and instead saved the Renew to go on his face. And I think I would rather have used an extra card here in the Holy Smite, but have 3 extra health at this point. Because you've seen a lot of the big threats already at this point in the game. That's not what you're afraid of.
That's fair. I would also have to rewind, but I think you're correct. I mean, you saw at the end that Ryvius valued 2 HP on his hero power on his face rather than maintaining the Pyro anyway.
Indeed.
Okay, Cartut finally finds time to hit the board, but Flurry has been sitting on this Consume Magic. Doesn't matter if he doesn't outcast it, in my opinion, as long as he can send more damage to the face. Oh!
Skull's nice. I mean, the
fragments in the deck right now.
Yeah, exactly. Drawing the Soul Fragment was rough, because otherwise I think you just slam Militia there. Like, you've seen the Soul Mirror already. There's very few answers in the deck.
It still slam the Militia? I was interested in that because of the anti-synergy somewhat that you get with Skull and the Soul Fragments leading up to a Militia turn.
That's definitely fair.
Just because he's seen the Soul Mirror and then he could just consume magic the Cartut. But now that that is not an option any longer, I think you just develop the Mana Feeder and go consume magic Chaos Strike.
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost looking if you go consume magic Blade Dance on this turn, just because you want to clear off the body for the Apotheosis at this point. And I feel like the game is really rapidly approaching its finish here. Like, it's only going to go on for 1, maybe 2 more turns here if you're winning for Flurry.
Yeah, I definitely like that line more than sinking the Marrow Slicer damage into the Cartut to deny Apotheosis. This gives Ryvius a very clean Twin Tyrant now.
Yes, I think here, like, I disagree with the philosophy of how you use Blade Dance in this matchup. Like, you don't need to use it at this point in the game to clear a big board. It's purely to use as any opportunity you can to get damage face.
Ryvius deviating with Raise Dead instead, trying to hit the Cartut Defender off of that while he had the least minions possible in the pool. Doesn't get it, which means he had to deviate from Twin Tyrant to put himself in a defensive posture. Otherwise, he misses hero power, I think. Ooh. So there's only 1 fragment left in the deck right now. That's a very lackluster Militia, but of course he could Soul Shear before the Militia.
Right.
I still want to see the Blade Dance get some use.
I mean, he can make that happen, right? He can go for Twin Slice Blade Dance. That wouldn't be awful, just to clear up some of this board. You have seen a Pyro already, so even at 1 or 2 health, it's kind of unlikely that these 3-1s get cleared off.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Still a very scary board state. And now Ryvius is probably just gonna have to go for Shadow Word Death Tyrant. He is working with 19 health. Flurry has 3 plus Eldraki. Twin Slice is Chaos Strike for another 8. The hero power, it's a little bit short by my count. You can start with Chaos Strike and see what that gets you.
Yeah, like, even having looked at it again last turn, he could have equipped the Eldraki and gone Blade Dance, which would have allowed for a full clear and 4 damage to go face. Like, it's just such a slow line that Flurry is taking. He's missed out like 9 damage or 10 damage over the past couple of turns.
I have to agree. Ever since we saw the 5 damage Marrow Slicer hit the Cartut, I felt like something was not adding up. But he is going to go for the Magtheridon activation. It's guaranteed even if the Blade Dance didn't hit the 1-3 because he could have sunk the Eldraki charge into it. But it's a big deal that he gets 3 to the face here.
Yeah, but he just didn't attack with the guy, right? He missed the attack
Oh, he
with the
didn't?
3-1. Yeah.
Oh my god, Flurry!
Just straight up.
Slow down!
Yeah, literally.
Slow down, dude. Oh my
A
gosh.
simple
Like, you could
spell
argue he wanted to sink it into a 1-3 if it missed, but even that doesn't really make sense because you have the weapon.
No. I don't make sense. And Ryvius was praying for a wave of apathy there. Doesn't get it. Forbidden if you have 12 mana.
Gift of Luminance doesn't do it.
Nothing
Cabal
good from Raised
Acolyte.
Dead. We could just be seeing the Cabal Acolyte as a taunt on this board. I
Yikes.
don't know. 21 Eldraki double twin size hero power is +7, but that is lethal with Marrow Slicer, and also Chaos Strike would have been enough, I think.
Yeah, I think it was just lethal no matter what here from Flurry.
Yeah.
Enough to get the game. Honestly, I was not anticipating that this game would be won because of the 12 damage from Magtheridon. Of all things,
Yeah.
that generally doesn't happen against Priest. But even then, you know, it's a roundabout way to get there. We did kind of disagree with some of the lines from Flurry and the obvious missed 3 damage at the end. But it's enough to take the win no matter what.
Man, I don't know if Flurry has some important appointment that he needs to go towards, because game 1, I think it's forgivable to miss the lethal setup with
Right.
the Eviscerate. It's not even strictly correct, even though I do think it was the best line. Game 2, missing 3 damage to the face, where it's clearly become a face race by that point of the game, is, to me, very egregious.
And it just speaks again to, I think, what's been missing here in APAC with Demon Hunter specifically, because just before we went to Masters Tour Montreal, I was starting to really heavily doubt Demon Hunter. I was thinking, you know, it just doesn't win a lot of the matchups. It doesn't feel quite strong enough. And then I feel like my eyes were opened when I went to Masters Tour Montreal. I think a lot of the APAC players, although with most of the decks, they are very, very strong. I think Demon Hunter in particular, there's just something missing. Players are not quite finding the spots to play more aggressively most of the time. Maybe Flurry just has a completely different philosophy that you play it more slow, controlling, try and get bored later on. But I do think, based on what I've seen from Masters Tour Montreal, that there is something missing there in terms of the Demon Hunter playstyle, and I hope that we see the players adapt to a slightly more appropriate version for appropriate playstyle. Sorry, for what is essentially a burn deck.
I have to agree. I mean, if you're playing Magtheridon in the deck, as some of the APAC players are still using that list, I think it's fair to see the deck to still have a controlling aspect, but just the reluctance to use Blade Dance, I feel, is one of the biggest missteps we've seen from some of the APAC players collectively. Like, for Flurry there, it was only the first copy he was using, and it was essentially like a vendetta in that spot to deal with the Cartot Defender, which I think is absolutely fine
Indeed.
usage for it.
Cobalt Spellkin held onto in the mulligan here for Flurry. I mean, already a super interesting mulligan strategy, because you can understand where he's coming from with this build of the deck against Priest. You need value, you want to activate your Arcane Breaths, but with no other plays in the early game before he top decked the 1-2 perfect start, it was looking a little slow.
I agree. I think you only justify keeping a bad dragon in the openers when you play Breath of Dreams in your deck.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he did hit the 1-2, but still, it's not like the Cobalt is playable till much longer after that.
Yeah, it means you're almost guaranteed to not have a completely dry hand for most of the game. But yes, it does definitely seem like a little bit slow, and he's feeling the effects here. He got above average outcome with 1-2, and still it's very little development in the early game.
Yeah. I mean, and he has an active Arcane Breath, but it's not even necessary that Ryvius would put down a target by this point.
Yeah.
He is not playing the Disciple of Galakron package. He also doesn't have Sethic Veil Weavers just to make room for all of the defensive options.
Right, I mean, you kind of have to expect this from Flurry. Like, there isn't much development at all in the early game from this Priest deck.
The Arcane Intellect is a big deal, though.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking that every single day of the week. I'm just not sure if it gets played this turn or if it's going to be Ping Spellwing.
I would much rather spend my mana on AI here. I'll take a sacrifice of a lab partner here for the greater
Yes.
good.
Especially since he has Cobalt Spellkin for next turn spoken for.
On wings of destruction they come.
Okay, yeah, I guess
That
Draconic
big.
Studies just to do something here, because without the Cabal Acolyte, like, the Wave of Apathy does very little in the matchup.
True. Oh,
Okay,
Firebrand is a great pickup for Ryvius.
pretty good.
A simple spell.
Oh, the Tome of Intellect and Arcane Breath decision point again for Flurry. Oh man, we were so nitpicky on that yesterday, but it's just funny to see again.
I mean, I think that was beyond nitpicky. That was just kind of like
Yeah.
genuine confusion at what was going on at that
True.
point in the series. But Potion of Illusion at this point, I mean, if we're talking about the game plan that Flurry is going for, this has to be in line with his thinking so far, right? Like, if you're holding on to Spellkin, you believe this to be a super slow matchup.
They come.
He is greeting it out, which is fair because Ryvius's list is very value light. It is
That's
built
true.
to take apart Bomb Warriors. No Galakron in there, so I think it's a reasonable assumption that Mage, if you take it a certain way with the playstyle, can just outlast the priest value and healing.
Maybe you're right. I think I'm like kind of starting to come around to agreeing with it from Flurry. Like, I've never played against on ladder, to my knowledge at least, a priest this teched for the slow matchups, like with this much healing, with this little win condition.
What to do?
I mean, we could just see Firebrand Arcane Breath.
You fight me.
That's a clue.
You get burned.
Yep. And then whether he wants to ping or use missiles. I'm kind of partial to missiles and use one Cyclone because now his hand is double Cyclone, double Evocation. So I
Yep.
think it's fine to not get max value out of everything, especially because he has Potion of Illusion to copy a Cyclone or a Mana Giant.
Or I would like to evaluate whether I liked his pick of Evocation there, but I literally couldn't see what the other options were because he picked it so fast in that spot. One thing I do love, though, however, is this Cyclone. I think with this much value in hand, absolutely you take 2 spells.
And while it's not necessarily good on paper to copy a Mana Giant with the Potion of Illusion, I was more thinking that's a cheap Conjurer's Calling target if you ever need.
True. Yeah, also
Another
a nice way to
Spellkin.
activate the side
A simple
quest.
spell should do.
And these Spellkins have just felt super slow for Ryvius.
For both players. Like, this is a battle of the 5-mana 3/5s. No one's dying.
Well, I think Ryvius is dying.
He's getting there.
Just a little bit on the inside. Primordial Studies with Brain Freeze, just anything to help him get closer to the cheap giants is a win in my book.
Yeah, I guess Thalnos makes the most sense there. I was looking at the Explorer there just as an activator in hand for any potential Arcane Breaths that you develop over the course of the game, which is fairly likely with double Evocation, but this just gets more stuff on the board.
Oh, Potion on this board. I feel like
Okay.
half of this is junk. I don't know.
I feel like this is a 5-mana missiles to the face there. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I like that.
Job done.
I guess the potion was just to spend Flurry's mana there. Ideally, if he could have fit in the Mana Giant into the potion, then I was much more amenable to the turn because you have a giant in hand, which can be
Right.
punished later on.
Yeah, I mean, he is running Conjurer's Calling in the list. I think it wouldn't have quite worked out with the mana as well, though, right? Because he had to play
Yeah.
the potion first.
Yeah, I mean, if he could have done it as well.
Right, sorry.
Oh, the mill!
Apologies.
No battle
Nutty.
cry, but it would have been so.
Well,
But anyway,
that is a 3-mana 4/7. He basically just played the the full health Injured Blade Master here. Very priest appropriate.
oh, but this top deck, Flurry could
Yikes.
just be looking at lethal this turn. 2 evocation,
Turn it up.
Texas Blast.
That's
Hello?
8 damage. That's lethal. Straight up.
Just like that. How in the world? That was the quickest series ever. flurry of plays from Flurry himself.
Indeed. Well, wherever he had to be after that series, he can definitely get there with plenty of time to spare. A 3-0 game to start us off, and an incredibly quickly played 3-0 game at that as well. My heart goes out to Ryvius. He really didn't get to play all too much Hearthstone. Just his priest instantly getting 3-0'd. It's, I think, one that you kind of have to go back to the drawing board with, because it feels like maybe, you know, although I imagine he has a very good matchup against Bomb Warrior specifically, he may have just gone that little bit too far down the spectrum of teching to Bomb Warrior, because it felt really helpless against most of the other decks.
He did lose both of his series this weekend, which puts Ryvius, I believe, at 1-3 in match score. Definitely not a start that he wanted to have. But from Flurry, even though he took the win there, and I want to say well-deserved, I think he was definitely just proving why he went with fast and easy as his Hearthstone slogan from that one interview. I mean, he was going about all of those plays extremely quickly, but it was sloppy, I have to say.
Yes, it definitely did not feel like an especially well-played series of Hearthstone. Like I said, I think that the overall understanding from Flurry was there. Like, even to the point of keeping the Cobalt Spellkin in the mulligan against that priest. The amount of times as mage I've just run out of any plays, I really don't